All right, so I'm going to stand in vertical stance, which means the leg is vertical as seen from the side. And I'm going to forward bend. Feet are hip distance apart, maybe a little bit wider, like outside pelvis distance apart. And pointing straight ahead. And as I flex my hips, my trunk moves forward in space, but my hips move back in space to balance the mass that's moving forward. So I'm just going to go forward and back up to legs vertical, which might not mean my trunk is vertical, just the legs vertical. So you're going to have a little bit of hip flexion when you come back up. And practice that a few times so that you're getting the articulation of the pelvis over the leg and it's not a movement of the spine. So the spine moves kind of through space in the same position it was in when you were standing. And then we're going to bring the leg to vertical, and now the flexion is going to happen at the knee. So the shin doesn't move, it's the vertical piece, and you're bending, of course you're bending at the hip as well as the knee, but the flexion happens at the knee. So it's like a squat prep, and again the trunk moves probably a little further forward in flexion so that it's approaching almost horizontal in space, but you're maintaining the spinal curves. Now let's just go back and forth between those two things. So hip flexion alone, you can have your hands hanging or you can put them on your pelvis if it helps. And then knee flexion with hip flexion. So it really helps to have a mirror, which I'm looking at behind the camera, which is why my head is always in that direction. So go back and forth a few times in alternating between those two things. Okay, now come up to standing and let's do a list. So I'll just turn this way for that one. So now you're going to bring your feet under your hip joints. They're still facing straight ahead. And shift your pelvis over one foot and the other. You're still trying to maintain that vertical leg. So if the weight of the pelvis is a little too far forward, you feel it in the ball of your foot and your toes. You can bring your pelvis back so the weight is in your heels, in the bones at the back of your foot. And shift forward and, side to side. And then you're going to stay on the right side and push the right foot into the ground. So the right hip moves down, and you can just flex the ankle of your left foot and lift it off the floor. So try to relax the kneecap of the standing leg down. So there's up, there's down. The weight stays back on the heel. As a matter of fact, you can take your pelvis and translate it forward through space until the ball of the foot takes some weight. You'll feel your toes all scrunching into the ground, and then shift your weight back over your heel again. Let's do that again, forward. You'll feel, like a depth to the gluteal fold in the back of your butt. And then as you come back, a little more neutral in the hip joint. All right, we place the left foot down, and let's shift the pelvis to the left side and hold. Push the left hip into the floor, or left foot into the floor. Float the right foot off. And again, just pause there for a minute. See if you can release the kneecap, which is the quadricep muscles at the front of the left thigh. You might find one side is more adept than the other. Adept. Shifting the pelvis forward and back. Oh, I just realized I'm not on the microphone, so I hope it picks up my... All right, and then we'll keep the weight back, and you can lower the right foot. All right, let's go back to the side position, and we're going to flex the hips, just the hips, and then flex the knees. And when if you're looking from at the side of your legs from in a mirror, you can try not to let the knees travel too far forward, so you can come forward a little bit to get a little deeper. Because the object here is to try and get the hands to the floor. See if you can get your hands to the floor. And when you come up, you're going to come up all at once. So out of that position using knee and hip extensions. So flex just the hips. So now your knees will be behind you. And then as you flex the knees, they can come forward a little bit. Try to stop them when they're around vertical, not too far forward. And if you can, reach forward, see if you can get your hands to the floor. Good. And then come back out of that. And let's do that one more time. Flex at the hips, flex at the knees and the hips, and lower yourself down, hands to the floor. Now, all you need to do here, if you can get your hands to the floor, fine. And if you can't, you can put a block down. Are you okay, Mary? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so even fingertips is enough. And now what you're going to do is think of extending your knees. You won't be able to extend them very far because that's a lot of hip flexion, but just kind of play with the back of your knee a little bit, lengthening and bringing it back. So I'm thinking back of the knee moving that way. And now I'm going to think sit bones moving up. So both of those things will extend the knee. And you can probably see that as I'm lifting my sit bones, I'm also rounding my spine. All right, now continue flexing the knees, come all the way down into a squat. Good. And then let's come up from there. So lift your hips away from your heels. Lengthen the back of your knee, come into neutral lumbar curve if you can, and then lift all the way up to standing. It's not easy, right? Flex at the hip. The hips will move back behind you to counter that mass going forward. Flex the knees. Try to bring your shins to vertical or just a little bit in front. Try not to come too far forward. Continue flexing the knees until you're in a squat position. Good. Lift your butt away from your heels. Extend your hips and knees and come to standing. All right, starting to feel a lot of work back there. So let's come down one more time, and this time we'll stay on the floor. So flex your hips, flex your knees, place your hands to the floor, drop into the squat, shift forward, place your knees on the ground. The toes are curled under. And you're kind of in this, I don't know, like a cat. Some people would say a dog. I'm going to say a cat. And then shift back, lift your knees, and come back onto your heels. So if you can't come onto your heels in the squat, in any of these squats, you can just place the half dome behind you so that when you shift back, your heels land on the half dome and you're not falling backwards. All right, now see if you can do that without the hands or with minimal hands. Bring the knees forward and then the knees up. I can't bring the knees up just yet because my left ankle is still sore when I do that. All right, and come all the way out onto your hands and knees. Take your hands about a little wider than your shoulder distance, or what you perceive your shoulder distance to be, because their shoulder blades could move wide. So if you're putting your hands kind of straight down under your shoulders, it might be more narrow than you think. So the hands are wide. In my case, the outside edge of my hand is on the outside edge of my mat because I'm quite big. And then from here, allow your lower back to relax towards the ground. And push the floor away through the hand until your shoulder blades are nice and wide. Lengthen through the back of the neck. And we'll just do a few rhomboid push-ups here. So with control, I'm going to lower my trunk towards the floor and then lift it up and away from the floor. So it looks like my spine is changing shape, but that's because my shoulder blades are coming up over the level of my spine from the side. In fact, I'm maintaining the lumbar and the thoracic curves and just moving the shoulder blades together and apart. Hi. You like it when I pretend to be a cat, don't you? Come to the top of your rhomboid push-up, or the widest apart you can get your shoulder blades, and then bring your, I forget what I was going to do. Oh, curl your toes under. Curl your toes under, and you're going to shift your weight back, shift your weight forward. So a little rocking here, and as you shift your weight back, you're going to maintain that lumbar curve so you don't round your spine under and lose the lumbar curve. And as you shift forward, you're extending your wrists. You're bringing the elbow towards the fingertips, so that means your wrists are extending, and that can be pretty extreme for a lot of people who don't even have the ability to be on the mat with the hand flat and the arm vertical. So if you get to this point and you have to bend your elbows, you're probably at your range, and you should stay a little bit further back. So make the shifting back more of your focus and less the shifting forward. Now shift back a little bit, so you've got weight. Your weight is not so much on your hands, and you're going to push your toes into the floor as if you're trying to move them that way. You're trying to kind of scrape the top of your toe towards the end of your mat. And as you do that pushing, you're going to push the shoulder blades apart, and just lift the knees and let them float. And hold them up just about an inch or so, not too far. The more you lift them, the easier it is. So if you can keep them really close to the ground, it's harder, which is in our case better. And then lower your knees to the floor. Good. All right, now let's walk out to a plank position. So take your hands a little further out on the mat, and then shift your trunk forward until you're more or less on your knees and hands. So it's okay if you're not in a completely straight hip here. You can have a little bit of hip flexion, and we're going to do the same thing. So push your feet into the floor and lift your knees. Just let them float. And then place them down. All right, walk your hands back under your shoulders. Actually, let's just shift back into hips to heels kind of position. You can lower your feet to the floor and come right down. Just take a break there. Fingers, or your elbows on the floor. Lengthen through the back of the neck. Just take a little breather. And if you can get your rib cage on the top of your thighs, it's kind of a nice place to practice breathing, because it limits the amount of extension or expansion through the front of your rib cage and promotes expansion in the back of your rib cage. Okay, and shift forward again. So I'm going to go through those two things again, and this time we're going to pay a little more attention to the arm position. So toes are tucked under, you're in your quadruped position, so the hands are under your shoulders, a little wider, and you've got your toes tucked under, and your knees are fairly close. And now we're going to rotate the arms. You can kind of roll your elbows away from each other and then towards each other. And as you bring your elbows back towards, pointing towards the back of your mat, the bend of your elbow, the inside bend, is going to be facing the front of your mat. And we're going to try and hold the arm position now. Shift back just a little. Curl your toes under. Push your toes into the floor and away from you, and hover the knees. Keep elevating the spine away from the ground, the rib cage. So think chest away from the ground, knees almost close to the ground, and then lower the knees. Good. Shift your hands forward. Shift your trunk forward. It's okay if you're not in a full straight plank. You can have a little bit of hip flexion here. Rotate your elbow creases forward. Push the toes into the floor. Hover the knees. Now, if you can see yourself on the side there, start to lift your hips up without straightening the knees. So with your knees kind of floating, you're just going to elevate the sit bones up and back. And this will take you into a downward cat. Yeah. All right, and then shift yourself forward until your knees are just floating, and shift back again. So this is a movement of the shoulders and the hips primarily, and not the knees. And we'll just go back and forth, knees almost to the floor, and then hips up and back. All right, and then come all the way down, lower your knees. All right, let's go back into that rest position. And this time, I'm going to turn my palms to face the ceiling. Supinate my forearms to try and get as much of the back of the hand on the floor as possible. And just take note of the distance between my elbows and between my wrists. So if I were to draw a line across the mat from the inside of one wrist to the other and the inside of one elbow to the other, those lines should be equally, they should be the equal length. And what most people are going to find is that their wrists are a little closer together than their elbows. So if you can, rotate your forearms, your thumbs out to the sides to try and get your forearms a little more parallel to the long edges of your mat. And if you can't, then go as far as you can and hold that. Let's come on up to sitting. So we're sitting on our heels, and if that's not comfortable, you can sit on a block or a bolster. And we'll just extend the wrist. So the palms are going to be on either side of your knees with the middle finger touching the floor and the palms facing away. Plow the front of the palm forward, trying to keep it vertical and on the frontal plane. So if it starts to rotate so that it's facing across the mat towards the other opposite corner, try to rotate your thumb back. Keep the heel of your hand, the top part, over the knuckle part, as there's a tendency to kind of push the knuckles forward and not have any extension in the wrist. And I want, as the arm goes forward, the wrist to extend. So think of, the objective is not really to get all the fingers on the floor, it's to bend the wrist backwards. And then when you can get the wrist as extended as you can here with all those other parameters, then rotate your elbows away from you. You'll probably find that you've become something that looks like this. So the elbows are coming in, they're abducting. Sit again. You don't need to go there right now. And you're going to try and move them apart without turning the whole hand. So the palm of the hand has to stay facing forward as the elbow moves that way. And hold that for a second. All right, let's shake that out. And let's come back into our plank downward dog position. So, shift your weight forward. You're on your knees, toes are tucked, and you're going to hover your knees. Try not to push the knees back, but lift the hips instead, and only go as far as you can. Try to maintain the lumbar curve. And now again, let's look at those arms, and as they start to, as your trunk starts to come between your arms, your elbow creases are going to want to rotate in towards each other. So go as far as you can without that happening. It won't be a full flexion, about here. Oops, I'm starting to straighten my knees. Now, can you drop your heels lower without pushing your knees back? So that's more soleus than anything. Back of the neck long. Lumbar curve is still with us. Shift forward now without lowering the knees until you're in a full plank position. Shift your hips back, and as your hips move back, your knees will stay in a space hold, so you end up with the knees flexed. Drop the heels low without pushing the knees back. Rotate the elbow creases forward. So we're not trying to go to full arms overhead yet. Shift forward into a full plank. Let's do that one more time. Start to move back. Move your hips back and then hold your knees so that as your hips move back, your knees end up a little bit bent. Drop your heels lower. And now from there, start to lower your knees, lower them until they're hovering. Your upper body will come forward a little. And now you're back in that knees, plank, almost quadruped. Bring your arms back. And just do a little rocking forward and back. Okay, I'm going to